Marco, welcome.
Hello, how are you doing?
Oh, pretty well. It's good morning for me and good evening to you. I'm really happy that you've come back again.
Yep. Yeah, my pleasure, my pleasure. We are just we are have no fear of competition because I think that there is a launch of a small application, a small operating system today, but who cares?
Just a small little one. Yeah, yeah. I think like a
Yeah,
few, I like maybe a couple percentage of the worldwide PC
yeah,
population uses it, you know?
yeah, yeah. But it's better. It's much better to see the packet recording or the blog later, so I don't have to spend time looking at all the advertising and just look at the news later, and it's easier.
Honestly, like just as a quick tangent, like I often just prefer the blogs where they just here's the features that you care about. Somebody just writes up, here's the top 10 things you honestly will actually use in the newest release. I didn't even realize that I had scheduled it for today for people tuning in for Windows 11 until like I
I
think
know
3 days
because I
ago.
think they announced it. They announced it later. So we
Yeah,
planned this event weeks
exactly.
ago, if I remember, and yeah,
But I will say for everybody that actually is tuning in, thanks for choosing us over the Windows 11 launch event. But yeah, Marco was on, I think, back in February talking about general DAX practices, um, bidirectional relationships, and a few other stuff. But since then, he's there's I think it was either right around or a little bit after the Dax.do website, which is an amazing learning tool that essentially is connected to like a hosted tabular model that has a UI on top of it and allows you to just play around with the demo data set and explore DAX and kind of figure out how to write measures without having to have to download Power BI first and all the other stuff. So it's a really,
yeah,
really nice learning environment. I'm constantly impressed with all of the software things that you guys do, either directly or through collaborations. Your A lot of the visuals that you do with OKViz are often like usually the more often than not the free ones that I normally end up using for the spark lines and everything else. Yeah, collaboration,
yeah,
of course, with Dex Studio and everything. So I know you have a lot of
yeah.
other people
Well,
working on them, but they in some way involve you, and it's usually very high quality with
yeah,
all the stuff that you choose to have your name associated with.
yeah. Thank you. And
Hmm.
I because few people are watching this, I can announce. So in a few weeks, we have a
Oh,
new component for from Okevitsa. It's amazing. I mean, I don't think
okay.
it's something that everybody can use, but actually it's incredible. There are no good components to solve that problem. And I think we found a problem that few people try to solve well. And this implementation we are doing is actually good. We'll see in a few weeks. I cannot say anything more, but something is coming.
I'm excited to see what they'll be then. That's cool. So we get a little, at least a teaser to keep an eye out on the blog in a
Yeah,
couple of weeks and see an announcement. But yeah, like
yeah,
I
yeah.
think
No, more than 2 weeks. More than two
okay.
weeks.
So
But
some
probably we will
yeah
start a beta. Yeah. Okay, but this is not the topic for today. We
yeah.
we will have some news soon. Yeah.
Just for like I'd say for the less than 1% who probably doesn't know you, is there a little bit of information you can share about yourself? I mentioned SQL BI, OKViz, and a few others. Certainly a lot of things that you've been
Yeah.
involved with.
Yeah, I what to say? I started using BI technologies too many years ago, and I always specialized in Microsoft technologies. And in the last few years, we worked more in Power BI, but we were using already analysis services, which is the engine under Power BI. So we simply moved our knowledge into this world. And so we focus today on data modeling
Hmm.
in the DAX language and the performance. So everything that concerns the semantic model that you can create. And of course, we focus mainly on the DAX language, which is the more visible thing, even though we do work also with a tabular model by itself, even though it's less, you know, advertised well. It's not as good. People immediately understand DAX problems that you can have when you have something with the tabular model is not immediate, but there are tools like tabular editor that you shown in the channel is it's amazing. And yeah, it's
I'm very like, and I'm sure you probably agree. Like, so one of the greatest things to come out for Power BI since its inception was the ability to connect external tools to it. And DAX Studio and Tabular
yes,
Editor to plug into it. and make it more accessible for people to use as advanced editors is certainly been a game chaser. And I've been sold on Tabular Editor 3 since day one. I'm still very much appreciative that that ended up getting shown worldwide for the first time on my channel. It's not something I actually expected to happen, but that was a fun day just to get him walk through in it. Like I just had to keep picking my jaw up from the floor as he kept showing more and more features in there, and it especially with the IntelliSense that's in there now that works really, really, really well. It still has one or two spots where it occasionally misses something, but it's darn near close to like being almost the same as what you would see in the Power BI desktop experience, which makes writing measures in there almost seamless, either that or in DAX Studio.
To be honest, there are a few bugs in the Power BI desktop editor that are not present in the Tabular Editor 3 version.
Interesting.
Power BI desktop sometimes shows you a syntax error for code that is perfectly valid. I don't know if it ever happened to you, but
yes,
it's annoying.
It's some, like, I think it initially, I've had ones where it started as an error. I go and fix it, and I think until I just hit enter, the error doesn't go away. It eventually does validate and remove it, but it doesn't automatically do a second check afterwards. And I think you're right. I've seen that like once or twice where I now know just to hit enter, but the first couple of times I kept looking in the code for the error and I couldn't find it anywhere.
Oh. Because the problem is the following: there are two parsers. One is the parser in the analysis services engine, which is the real one, and then there is another parser used in the DAX editor of Power BI Desktop, which is a completely different implementation. So there are several things that happen. Sometimes there are functions that exist in the engine and are not recognized by the Power BI Desktop UI, but sometimes there are combinations of syntax that are not recognized by the Power BI desktop editor. But if you ignore the warning that you have and you just click enter, it just works. And it continues to show you that there is an error, but in reality, it is perfectly valid. So it's it's something that and there are bugs that have been there for more than 2 years. So this is the
one that I'm actually I was just saying the one that I'm actually hopeful for is. And you might have seen the video that I did on it a few months back. It's the fact that when you do a date change conversion in Power BI, a data type conversion, if you convert from number to text, it actually does convert that column to a type. I released a video where if you convert from date time to date, it doesn't actually convert that because there is no date data type in the model itself, only in the layer. But it makes the user think it converted to date, where all it does is format. And then if you try to key it, the keys don't work. So to me, that was kind of a bug. And I actually did talk to some internal people. And as they've said, it's going to be on the roadmap now to actually consider providing some kind of a friendly warning to say, by the way, you're not converting this. If you want to convert it to date, please go into Power Query. So they'll provide some hint of what's actually happening to prevent the confusion. So it's one of those times where I'm happy, like, oh, I've finally reported something that will hopefully make a change to help the end users.
Yeah, I know. But
there's 1,000 things we can talk about. But the thing we're here today, of course, to have a conversation on is DAX.do. And like I said, how long did that take to develop? Out of curiosity, because it's a very, very polished website experience.
So the development is so DAX.do. The DAX.do experience is made by two part of software. One is the UI that you see in your browser.
And I'll just flip over as we talk about it, by the way.
Yeah. So this is DAX.do. So DAX.do is basically a UI for those people that never seen it. You just go to this URL, and then you can just type DAX code, right? For example, I can write evaluate, and I can write, I don't know, product. Simple like that. And if I run the code, I see the preview of the data. And of course, I put an S that is wrong. Okay, let's try again. Evaluate product shows me will show the list of all the products with all the columns. And as you see, because the result is too big, it has been truncated, because it could be a good idea if I just show the top 10 products, for example. Now let's put the right syntax here, and I can run this again. Now, when you do that, what is happening? Several things. First of all, there is a user experience typing code, which is what I did now. And when I press run, the query that I wrote is sent to a web service, which actually connects to an analysis services database, send the query, retrieve the query, and then send the result. But analysis services by itself cannot be used by the code that run in the browser. So we need a middle layer, which is a web service, which is something that creates a dialogue between the DAX.do UI and analysis services behind that. These services are not only made to run the code that you see, but also to provide, for example, the diagram that you see here. Where does this diagram come from? Basically from the service. The service provides me the information about the metadata that I see here. So I can see here the list of the tables. Let's close the advertising. The list of the tables, you see that each table has columns. There are tables that have also measures like sales. And of course, if I want to create something like, let's write something different, summarize columns. Of course, we have IntelliSense, we have, not IntelliSense, sorry, this is autocomplete. IntelliSense is a registered, how do you call this? It's a trademark.
Trademark,
okay? Trademark. Yeah, it's a trademark owned by Microsoft, so we cannot use IntelliSense, so please use autocomplete if you're not talking about the Microsoft product. And here I can say, for example, I want to see the sales amount by, for example, product brand. And you can just use drag and drop like this to move things around. And of course, how can the UI of this page know that we have these columns and these relationships between columns and so many things and all the details that you see here? For example, when I click on a relationship, you see that in the lower pane, I think not here. Oh, let me see. When I click on a column, for example, you see here other information about the minimum value, the maximum value, the number of unique values. So this information is, let me see if I can highlight this. This information is what you have from the service. So because the client doesn't know this, right? The client is not able to know this information. So let me complete this. So if I write this code, and the goal of this editor is just to provide a playground to write DAX code and to test DAX code. So this is not designed to create something that run on your own code. Oh, there's a comma missing. On your model, right? You have a couple of models available now. We could extend this in the future. So now I was running the code over on the database that has DAX guide, because what you see here is something that you have in DAX app. For example, let's say that I like this code for some reason. I like, oh, this code is very nice, and I want to share it. I can click this button, and I can save my code, getting a URL that I can share with the world. So for example, this is the public link that everyone will be able to use as a read-only. But if in the future I want to edit and I want to fix the code, this is the private link that I have to save somewhere that allow me to modify the code if I made some mistake without losing this URL. So now if I get this URL and I go, let's open a new window, incognito mode. When I open this code, well, let's remove this. When I open this code, I have the same code with the result. It has been generated this way. So I not only see the code and the result, I can also start from this code and apply my changes and play again. We use this where, for example, in DAX Guide. If you go to DAX Guide, or in articles where we use examples that can be tried with queries over these databases. So for example, if I go to, let's see, add columns. Add columns, I have examples here. I have the example of add column with the result. And if I go back to the previous window, you see that here in embed, I have the code that I can copy and paste in my blog. You have different formats. There is one for WordPress, there is one for HTML, one for a Word. So there are different formats so that if you want to get the result of the query embedded into your article, you just copy and paste it. And when you click on try it, you are directed to DAX.do, where you have the code, the result, and you can play with it. And I hope that you noticed that it was immediate. Why? Because one big work here was to reduce the workload over the analysis service database, because most of the times this query, the result of these queries will not change. So we just cache them in a very aggressive way so that we reduce at the minimum the need of actually calling analysis services engine on the back end.
Okay.
Because this way also increase the scalability of the system. So
one of the things that impresses me is just the I appreciate the additional icon information that you give over on the left, which is like there's a few things in there that I saw like, man, this is great, and I wish Power BI's actual fields list had a couple of these extra indicators that you provide over there,
Yeah, we spent some time here. For example, there are a few details. Like we have this visualization of the table that is a date table. Yep. We have two relationships that are using this column as the one column of the one-to-many relationship. And if we click here and we go, I do remember, no, this is something different. So we have to go, we have to go here. So if you see that if I expand this pane at the bottom, we have the information. Let me highlight this. This is the symbol that tells me there are two relationships. When I look at the pane below, I see the two relationships here, which is a very convenient way to realize, this column is used by two other tables, two columns in two other tables, or in this case, the same table, but column order date and delivery date, there are two relationships. This is an information that sometimes is hard to retrieve when you have a Power BI desktop UI. Yeah. And I mean, if Power BI desktop want to copy this, I'm perfectly happy. I would like it, because of course we cannot implement this in Power BI desktop. But the idea is that the concept behind that is that the service provides the information, and the UI just combine this information. What amazes me, this was an interesting, because I didn't implement the JavaScript part. So what you see here is HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript. And we use a few libraries. For example, this one is the diagram view. You can move the tables around. You can expand them or collapse them, similar to what you do in Power BI Desktop. And we can also color them. For example, you see that we have defined these three colors for three different table types: fact table, dimension, parameter table. And so it's an arbitrary information we provided. It's not something that has been assigned automatically, right? So the service has this information and provide this information to the web page. But if I apply changes, whatever I do now is stored into the local cache of the browser. So of course, if I open the same page on another browser, I will lose it. But next time I open the same diagram, I will still see the same personalization that I did. And yeah, this is also another. And for example, another thing that is interesting is this. Look at that. So if I move this here now, imagine we have multiple monitors, right? Because now we have only one. So if I, let's say, it's challenging because we don't have much space. But when I click on this, I think that we highlight, no, I remember there was a way to highlight the relationship between the two monitors. So basically, when I navigate, what I want to do, if I want to highlight a relationship in the diagram, I can do that from the other window. So if you open these two windows in two different monitors, you can actually see that there is an integration between the two views too.
Okay.
Another amazing thing. Now, every interaction you do locally in the web page does not require any call to the service. So the service is called only when you open the page, when you change this, or when you format a code, run line, copy paste, or share. So when you use this ribbon, yes, of course. But for example, this one is just made client side. So this is not a new query. Every time I change the format, it's just local to the visualization. All these settings are automatically managed here.
That's fantastic. Okay. I had a quick question about the URL. Let me pop this up onto the screen. Yes, so here we are. I wanted to know if the URL can be password protected in any way. I'd be curious why I guess it would need to if it's all public data, but interesting question though.
Yeah, no. And I think we can use this question to answer to a more generic question I received, which is, can I use this amazing tool with my model? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
For two reasons. One reason is that we should use a web service that we pay for to connect to other models. So we will start to, it's already free, but it will be more expensive. We try to keep it not so expensive using the cache, using other techniques. And the experience was very good because we learned a lot about how writing middle tier services using Azure functions. If you use the right tool and the right way, it's amazing. It's really, really, really inexpensive. This
Agreed.
The middle tier. And it is very scalable. We made tests. Really, it's hard to. You want to do a denial of service here? Try it. No, there is the bottleneck will be at a okay. If you want to create a problem, you should try to run completely different queries at the same time, because those queries will be sent at the backend, and the backend will be the bottleneck. But the scalability of the middle tier is incredible because it starts to spin other instances automatically, and then they are shut down when they are not used, and the cost is very, very small. If you compare this with a solution based on application service on Azure, or other other techniques that scale out but based on a larger type of machines, it is way more expensive. It's an amazing technology. I discovered that they made but you have to use the right components, the right version of .NET, because otherwise the cost of the memory and so the cost of everything you do will start to increase. We used .NET Core with the latest libraries from Microsoft to connect to analysis services, and everything is managed. We don't use unmanaged components, and yeah, it's very technical. I know that it's a very technical discussion, but it's amazing. So the first problem is that we have this service that it's the service that is required to run, and it should run on connecting to other analysis services database. The second problem, the more important one, you should provide us full credential to access your data. Now, you should be crazy doing that, but I don't want to be responsible for that, because of course you could say, well, Marco, I trust you. Yes, but the problem is that the day there is a leakage of data, you will say, oh, SQL BI, you stole my data and you distribute the data. No, we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is the reason why the technology is interesting, but this is an interesting proof of concept of what you can do using a browser technology. And when you compare this with what you have in Power BI Desktop, you say, wow, Power BI Desktop is slower, but Power BI Desktop is made using the same technology, but with the much bigger overhead for the underlying stack of technology that is used. And so
Didier is on, by the way, and he had a great question about a bit of the schematics of what's running in the back end. Besides everything you mentioned, like, is there any version of like Dax Studio doing any of the evaluations for this stuff, or is it just it's straight analysis services? No like no intermediate between that. Okay.
I can show. I can use the white. I like to use the whiteboard, so let me use the whiteboard.
Yes, I would love to see that. The first time you
We
used it
have
on one of these, so that's great. Go ahead.
The architecture is the following. So we have the browser. So this is Dax.do, and this is your front end, right? So this is HTML, HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript. This is what we have. Now, Dax.do connects to a service which is in the cloud. So we are in the cloud, and this is our service. Let's call this Dax.do service. This service has a connection that goes to analysis services, Azure analysis services. So this is, everything is on Azure, but it could be also in different platforms. It doesn't matter. The problem is that only Azure has instances of Azure analysis services. So when you run a query here from Dax.do, so you run, oops, no, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do this. You run a query from Dax.do, what happens? The query is sent to the Dax.do service, and if the query has been already executed with the same code over the same database, the result goes back to Dax.do. Why? Because we store in a storage, in an Azure storage, the results of the query that have been executed, right? Especially when you use the share button, those queries are never executed anymore unless you change something in the query. But if the query is different, then of course we go to, at that point, so let's do another color for this. So let's use the green one. So now I send another query. This query is new. So the query is sent to analysis services, goes back here, and goes back to Dax.do. But in the meantime, it's also stored in the storage. So when I say this is an aggressive system. Now, the scalability I was mentioning before is that this part could create new instances if there are too many requests at the same time. To be honest, we don't need it, right? We don't have so many requests. The first few days, everybody was using it. But now, the regular consumption, I mean, we'd have several daily requests, but we are not in the hundreds. We are below hundreds of requests every day. We are in the hundreds, not in the thousands. This is and it's a low level of consumption. Come on, is something we can. It's just one instance that is running. But if now we are doing a demo and 200 people will consume the service at the same time, they will not notice a particular slowdown. That's amazing.
What's the scalability? How much have you planned for a potential scale up of people consuming that? Is it on any kind of an Azure instance that automatically would adjust for that, or?
Yeah. The part that we are not scaling is the analysis services one. So this is one part that we're not scaling. So if you want to create a problem, you can just create multiple concurrent requests querying different versions of the same query. So you create different queries that change every time. So the multiple requests that come to the engine, to the service, are always different. And this way, this is not used. And even though we scale this, creating multiple instances, we don't scale this part. The analysis services part is something we're not scaling out today because it would be expensive. So this is a free service, right?
Yeah.
So, but we have seen that we the first few weeks we were monitoring everything, and we realized that we don't need to scale up anything. Yeah, it works.
That's good.
I mean, again, because the goal is to use this as a playground. Is the data set is small, the database is small, but as a proof of concept for the technology, you could implement the same stack if you want to create your own web application that consume analysis services. You could do that, and it would be inexpensive. If you think about a public web page, I mean, you have two options, right? One is that you use Power BI and you publish a public dashboard, and you can use everything you have in Power BI. You want to restrict the audience to a limited audience. So you want to authenticate the users with your own authentication. You have to use Power BI embedded. But imagine that you don't want to use the graphic from Power BI. You don't want to use the UI of Power BI. You want to use your own code to do whatever you want. It's not rocket science. The code that we built is not something that requires years of work. I mean, we spent a few weeks, not more than that. This is not a project that is a month of work. It's weeks of work.
It's like,
No,
it
really.
didn't take that much time. I actually have a really good question that just percolated into my brain after checking. Somebody was wondering, like, is there any Power BI involved in this? And like, it's not at all, like, nothing directly related to Power BI other than it's the shared model, you know, the Vertipack engine. But considering that there are sometimes differences between the, you know, Vertipack engine potentially that's in Azure Analysis Services and Power BI, is there anything that you can script in here that would not work in Power BI, considering that this is just an AAS engine with, you know, Vertipack engine versus an actual Power BI model that's in the Power BI service?
No, they are the same. The difference is that Power BI today has the composite models that are not available in Azure Analysis Services, but we're not using it, so that's just not a problem. But all the features of a model and all the DAX features that you can try, the two engines are completely aligned. So the analysis services and Power BI service usually update the service every 2 weeks. So maybe that they don't deploy a new version the same day, but you can be sure that within 2 weeks you have the same code, included the same bugs in the two engines. So if there is a new feature or there is a regression for a bug, it will appear within 2 weeks. Actually, it's more complex than that because Microsoft does not deploy the service at the same time all around the world. They start deploying the service in a few areas, and then they slowly deploy in other areas. So this way, if they recognize, oh, there is something that is not working, they can roll back before they spread out the bug too much. And they have different,
Australia, I was just going to say Australia, I know as an example, gets stuff sooner. There's a certain MVP who manages to find like service features before anybody else, and I wondered for the longest time, like, how do you? Oh, it's because he gets like a day or two early. The releases come out earlier in Australia because it's a smaller market that they basically test the updates for the service on. Like, because there's been a few times where I've seen a post, I go look for it in my Power BI tenant, and like, where is this feature? It's not available yet. But like that's how I found out that there's soft rollouts for updates within, you know, the different markets for Power BI, and I think similar with tabular model. But I think to your point too is 99.9% of the time, Power BI Desktop's version of Tabular Editor and Azure Analysis Services are usually the same. The biggest difference historically has been what features are exposed in the UI. But you know, before we had external tools, we couldn't do calculation groups or all this other stuff, even though technically the engine was capable of doing that. I did have one interesting question that I'm sure both of us have lots of opinions on, but Chewy was wanting to know is like, should we worry at all about the fate of Power BI Desktop in the near future?
So it depends on. So I'm not worried, and I think nobody should be worried. The problem is that, from my point of view, the problem is the following. I see a trend. So if you look at the announcement that Microsoft is making about the future evolution of Power BI, they're making a huge bet on the web development experience. And I always say, Microsoft, please, Microsoft, set lower expectations. Because the reason why they are doing the web development experience is not to improve the current development experience, but is to enable users that cannot use Power BI Desktop to be able to edit a model. I think there is a disconnection between the expectation of someone and what the reality could be. For example, I give you an example. DAX.do doesn't have a DAX parser, okay? Which means that if there is a syntax error, you see the syntax error when you try to run the code. The DAX parser is a big problem because you have to make a choice. You either rely on the existing parser in analysis services, which means that you always have to transmit the code to analysis services and then receive the syntax error if there is a syntax error, or you have to build your own engine. Now, the funny thing about DAX is not a complex language, but is strange enough to be not easy to parse from most of the existing parser. I mean this. If you just want to create the syntax tree structure of the syntax, is relatively easy. There are many tools that can do that. We used one of them to build DAX formatter, and then we customize a few things. But when you want to provide autocompletion, you want to suggest the valid syntax for the columns that you can use or the measure that you can use in that context, it's a total nightmare. It's a total nightmare.
Interesting.
The parser is a few years of work. The parser is a few years of work. Don't underestimate the effort. Indeed, there are no DAX parsers today written in JavaScript. And the last thing we want to do is creating a new one in JavaScript to work here. The day someone invents some tool to get a C# code base and to migrate the C# code base to a TypeScript code base, that day we can migrate the existing parser for tabular idea, for example. That would be a great idea. But rewriting it, wow, no. Now, the problem is that, I don't know if Microsoft created this code, but if you want to create this code, the first problem you have to solve is that you don't have the tabular object model libraries in JavaScript. So you have, if you are in .NET, you have an infrastructure you can use. You go to JavaScript, you have nothing. So you have to build the entire infrastructure, or you have to rely using services to the existing infrastructure. But the problem is that if you rely on the existing infrastructure that is not on your PC because you are running on the browser, the existing infrastructure is on Azure, you introduce latency. Now, the latency, when you are typing code, you don't want it. You don't want to create this web service call when you are typing, because the service should do a lot of work for something that locally will be much easier. And so for this reason, when I see, web development experience, I say, guys, unless you rebuild the entire stack in JavaScript, which at this point, I will wonder why you don't release the libraries while you're writing them, because we can test them and we can use them, right? Because if you provide me the tabular object model as a JavaScript library or as a TypeScript library, wow! At this point, I don't need the web service anymore to write DAX.do, for example, because the only reason why we have the middle tier is because we don't have the libraries. You give me the libraries, I remove one part of the service, and I go straight. Now, I use the service because I scale out and I use caching. But if I don't need to do caching and I want to go straight to analysis services, I don't need the middle tier service. But we don't have the libraries now. Are you going to create the libraries? If the answer is no, or if you create a subset of the libraries to provide only the minimal information that you need for your web development experience, then you have the same problem that Power BI has today. Today, Power BI has core in C#. Then you have the JavaScript code that has a mirror of the data that you have in .NET with some difference. And they have to keep these differences aligned. And when you use the external tools update one of these two mirrors, but not the other one. And the other one has to be synchronized. This is the hardening problem that we know, so that not all the features are supported. And again, it's an architectural problem. So when I see these problems and I don't see how they solved it, I have to assume that they are not solving it. And if they are not solving it, they are just creating something that will be the minimum viable result with a minimum effort, which is far from what we want. So I'm not saying, so what, again, I look forward to trying it and then I will evaluate. My problem is that it's a huge investment. And when you make such a huge investment, you probably want to release something as an intermediate milestone to reach your goal. And I didn't see any intermediate release so far. So for this reason, I'm a little bit skeptical that they would solve all the problems. They will solve one problem. You have a Mac, you don't want to install any Windows compatibility layer. Okay, then you use the web development experience. Will you be happy? I don't think so. But
that's what I'm expecting is for people that are using entirely cloud-based services like Azure and other stuff where they don't require local connections, and they're wanting to use an iPad or a Linux machine or a Mac machine. I think that's what they're trying to solve. At least one of the reasons that they're trying to solve for. But like you said, there's a plethora of reasons that related to external tools and a lot of the additional development for leg and everything else that has to be accounted for that would almost require like a miracle of coding to be able to solve in any short or near future to completely move everything to the cloud. And plus, a lot of people just wouldn't have access, and security reasons would not want to be developing against a cloud-based source that requires passing information up and down through the internet. So I think it's going to be something that'll be supplemental, but it's not going to be something designed to be a full-on replacement at any point for a local version of desktop.
Yeah, then I agree. At the same time, I cannot ignore that every new feature released in data flow in the last few months has not been released for Power BI Desktop yet.
Service only yet? Because then people like, well, I don't see this in Power BI Desktop, and it can get confusing. Yeah. I have a couple other questions that I'll queue for the end. I do have one specifically related to DAX.do that I want to throw to pull us back into this, and it's a really good question. So is there any kind of like a pivot table type option similar to like what's in Tabular Editor 3 where you can kind of like create like a table grid view or pivot table view of the data?
No, we have no, and the reason is the following. The goal of DAX.do is to provide a playground to test DAX code that you are writing for learning DAX, or to test some DAX syntaxes. If you need a query builder, or you probably you don't want to learn DAX, right? You just want to get some data. You have a query builder in DAX Studio if this is what you want, but the primary goal of DAX.do is to, DAX.do originally tried to solve one problem. We wanted an environment to, you want to test the DAX syntax quickly without spinning a Power BI desktop window. This is the easiest and fastest way to do that, right? Oh, does top pen does this or do that, or can I write this? I don't know. I can test it for ourselves. Then, of course, we use this as a learning tool because in DAX Guide was the perfect place to, you provide an example. What do you do if you have 400 functions and you want to provide examples for 400 functions? What do you do? Do you release 400 PBX files, each one at least 1 megabyte? Come on.
Yeah.
So it's much easier and more immediate to use this approach. And so this is, for this reason, is so tight. So DAX.do exists because we have DAX Guide, and you see it here that when you click on a function like summarize columns, you see that the function, now we have this small screen, but you see that when you move around the syntax, you immediately have the code. So for example, if I write here filter and I have this, you see that I have a filter. I click here, I have summarize columns. I have the information that come from DAX Guide, and then you can always open the window in Dax Guide and see more information here. But again, the purpose is having a learning tool, not having another development environment for your own code. That's not the approach, because again, you don't have, in this user interface, you don't have, what did I do here? Oh, yes, because I don't have a filter. Yeah. But again, you see that the idea is to have this. Oh, by the way, we have also the dark mode. If you like the dark mode, you have different options for formatting the code this way. So, but these are, you know, small toys that just make the UI nicer and more enjoyable. But this is just, you know, you change the CSS style. It's not rocket science.
Yet it was one thing that they didn't, that took them years to finally add, like as far as the dark mode theme in Power BI.
But again, the problem is that if you have a requirement since the beginning, it's much easier.
Oh, agreed.
It was not a requirement. No, in reality, the problem is more complex. Power BI evolved as an architecture over the years, and they replaced part of the UI from .NET code to HTML, JavaScript code. So the UI you see today is always more JavaScript. But the reason why, for example, in the diagram view, you cannot create a measure is because you mix different parts of the UI that are not compatible yet. So they are, you know, slowly migrating the base code to one base code, but there are still restrictions because the job is not complete and is a work in progress, right?
Yeah.
In this case, we just had one page, one requirement, and much easier.
I actually appreciated last month when Will Thompson came on and talked about just the sheer number of different teams that work on different parts of Power BI Desktop. And it's not just one single group or one person that's working on it. Like, it's a lot of collaboration that goes on with those.
Yes, it's a large effort, and I don't want to underestimate. When I, from my point of view, Power BI Desktop is a great product.
Mm-hmm.
The only critic I have is that trying to create a single development experience for every user is simply something that doesn't work, from my point of view. And we have the proof for that, because if you look at the Power BI blog, and we have this blog post that had appeared about the community and third-party tools, where Microsoft basically says, okay, you want to create enterprise-level models for Power BI, you need so this one, the detailed article that we published. So this link this link is for the article we published on SQL BI. The article describes scenarios where using external third-party tools not only improves productivity, but may even be necessary. So Microsoft said that, not, okay? This is written in the Microsoft blog post, Power BI blog. So from my point of view, it's official, right? So I'm not saying this. Microsoft is saying this. As of today, Power BI doesn't have all the features. And you don't have all the features in Visual Studio too, because if you want to use Visual Studio, you have to start from scratch. You cannot get the Power BI Desktop model and open it in Visual Studio. It's not possible. It's not supported. The only way to manage that is in Tabular Editor. You want translations, you want calculation groups, you want partition, you want, you know, many features in Power BI, they are simply not accessible. And so if this is the situation, I mean, Microsoft said this clearly, you need third-party tools. That's fine. Okay. Now is official. So now when a customer asks, oh, but this is not a Microsoft tool. Look, there is no Microsoft tool to do that. So make your choice. If you want to use this feature that Microsoft support, but you either write your own JSON file manually with a text editor, which is supported, or you use a third-party tool. These are the two options.
Yep. I mean, and or like, you know, if you want or just circumvent Power BI and just build it in Azure Analysis Services, which again lets you use Tabular Editor or Visual Studio, which is an actual Microsoft supported created tool. But there's
Yeah,
all paths to a solution.
But the problem is that you cannot use Visual Studio if you started with Power BI Desktop.
Correct.
Maybe
in that
this
sense,
is not clear. If you want to use Visual Studio, you can use Visual Studio, but you have to create a new project in Visual Studio. So if you use Power BI, I assume that you started the project with Power BI Desktop. Now, the thing is that if you create a project in Power BI Desktop, there is no way you can use Visual Studio. You have to start from scratch. Many people don't realize that. If you look at the article I pointed out here, there is a detailed explanation about why. So this article explains, so it's a long article, it's boring. Okay, I tell you, this is boring. This is boring stuff. But you need to understand what is happening. Oh, there is the history, the tools, what is the tabular model, what are the API, what is doing what why Power BI Desktop work this way, why Visual Studio work this way, and there is a clear explanation about why the situation is this one, and it's not something that can change soon, unless Microsoft make a big investment in Power BI Desktop, of course. But this is just to be clear, right? So this is the situation. So, but I think that it's better to know how the thing is, because otherwise you have always some expectation for something that cannot happen. Yep. So can, in the short term, Visual Studio be used in Power BI with projects created in Power BI Desktop? No. Can Power BI Desktop use advanced feature? No. You can use a tabular editor. And Microsoft said, we don't have plans in the short term to fix this, or not to fix it, but to because we have these tools, Microsoft says we can continue to be focused on other features.
Yes.
Because the advanced developers can use these third-party tools, which is fine. And I think this is a great achievement that we had so clear words from Microsoft I mean, this is very clear, right? So this is okay, that's fine. Now we know. But this way, believe me, in the last 2 years, we had a lot of people saying, oh, but this is not Microsoft, so it is not supported. So we wrote a long article. We had a statement from Microsoft, and now it's, I mean, what do you want more? Because this is the situation. It's a technical thing. It's not something that you can. So if you think that this is not true, okay, these are the facts. So please provide the other some argument against that. But this is the situation today, and this is not going to change in the near future, 1-2 years, in my opinion.
I'll also just add on that I know some people with the release of like a paid Tabular Editor 3 have wondered, like, wait, am I now going to have to be forced to pay for an external tool to be a full developer for Power BI? And Tabular Editor 2, the free or the original free version, will continue to be updated and supported. There will just be certain additional features in Tabular Editor 3 that will continue going forward. But there will always be a free version of Tabular Editor to use if you want to do advanced modeling. So like you can still use Power BI and still have Dax Studio, Tabular Editor, multiple other free tools to use to basically do advanced development with it without having to, unless you choose to, pay for additional ones.
Yeah, but it's always a question about how much you value your time or the time of your developers, because Tabular Editor 3 costs $10 per month per developer, not per user, because sometimes people say, oh, this is per user. No, it's per developer. It's different. If you have 20 users or 100 users, you might have only 1 or 2 developers. So Power BI Desktop is $10 per month. And you can use Tabular Editor too, yes. What is the value of, in time, what is the value of $10? Do your math, everyone, in different countries, there are different wages, but do your math and think about the saving time you have, for example, by having a complete DAX parser, for example, just the third thing. So just the DAX parser that you have in Tabular Editor 3 is something that will save you a lot of time compared to Tabular Editor 2, because in Tabular Editor 2, if you type the wrong DAX, or you don't have autocomplete, right? So you have to be good in writing DAX. Otherwise, you can use the Power BI Desktop UI, but the Power BI Desktop UI does not have a good DAX editing experience for many reasons, starting from the size of the editor, or you cannot move the editor on another window, for example. So it's a question of
number
productivity.
one for me is just the fact that every time you write a measure, you have to execute it and then write another one. You can't queue like 5 or 6 measures and then have it saved to the model. And on a large model, that's 15 seconds sometimes that you have to let the wheel spin.
Yeah.
And that's that right there. There's times where I have to maybe create multiple versions of the same measure for some reason, and there's instantly like 10 minutes that I've just saved of my time versus having to queue them all up, copy paste really quickly in Tabular Editor and save. Like it's fantastic for little shortcuts like that just really save on time.
Yeah. But for example, the other thing that Tabular Editor 3 has is the Dax Script. You can create a single text window with multiple measures defined, and you can copy paste code. You can search and replace it. I mean, if you work with 10 measures in your model, you don't need Tabular Editor. If your model has 100 measures, you need Tabular Editor, believe me, because it will save a lot of time. So then, of course, it has a price that increases depending on the deployment scenario you have. So if you have I think Power BI Premium per user is $35 per developer, and Power BI Premium Capacity, which means that your company is spending $5,000 per month as an entry point, is just another $95 per month. So it's 2% more. Yeah. So, I mean, yes, it has a cost. I agree. You can try to ask 2% of discount to Microsoft, and you save that money and you spend for the editor, or I don't know. I'm just kidding. But the idea is that you don't need it. And technically, you can do everything in Tabular Editor too, but it's just a question of how much time you can save for your developers. That's it's just for me, it's a simple math about what is the cost of the developer, what is the cost of the product.
It's an ROI, right? Return on investment, like $10 versus it's time saved most of the time. I just had a fun comment from somebody in here that I just wanted to pull up here. When we mentioned 100 measures, he thought 10, he or she actually, I'm not sure, thought 10 was a lot. I'll also just say, like, enterprise models can have hundreds. Many multiples of hundreds of measures. Yeah.
I have seen models with more than 3,000 measures.
My biggest is 1,200 that I built at any point.
No, I have seen more than 2 or 3 different companies with a Power BI desktop model with more than 1,000 measures. And believe me, when I have seen the time it requires to just change one measure, I said, guys, but really, seriously, you never use Tabular Editor? No. How did you create this? Oh, we waited a lot. Yes, I know, but the cost of development of that model for the company, it's insane. Because imagine that you have 1,000 measures, and of course, the first 100 measures will not take too much time to enter. But every time you validate a measure, it takes 5-10 seconds on my machine, and they didn't have the desktop I have, believe me, because they have maybe a notebook or something. It is slower. It's insane, and I mean,
and I would say with a lot of those too nowadays, like 1,000 measures pre-calculation groups can now go down to probably 250 to 300, because a lot of those times you have 50 core measures, but then those 50 have 15 cuts of month to date, running total, etc., and then that's 50 times 20 or 30, and like you immediately just scaled it up. You now whittle that down with calculation groups, which does the same thing, saves yourself a lot of time. But I do have a couple of questions that I wanted to pull up. One, I'll see if you can interpret. So it was a two-part because I asked for a clarification. So I'll pop the first one up. Was the original question was can we have dynamics DAX by any method? And when I asked for clarification, this came up then. Suppose if we have a formula for a measure as a string and we still needed to evaluate that similar to SQL. So I wasn't able to interpret that, but does that make sense to you?
Yes, no, I completely understand.
Okay.
No, the answer is that we don't have this feature yet. It's a long discussion. I mean, we discussed this with Microsoft for a long time. Let's say that the problem is bigger. So the ability to write a string or compose a string with a measure would be useful, but it's not in any plan they have. Okay, they don't have any plan to do that. There are different reasons for that. One of the more important ones is security. And then, of course, you can have also performance-related reasons, something like that. But for example, MDX had this feature. You had a feature called str to MDX, something like that. So you were able to get an MDX statement, convert into a string, and convert into MDX. It was very slow. So the real problem is that even though you get rid of the security issues, you will always have a performance issue that, for technical reasons, will not be easy to solve. And in general, DAX doesn't have any form of metaprogramming. So you cannot write code that is aware of the structure of the model. I mean, imagine this. Can you write in DAX an iterator over the columns of a table? No. Right? So you don't have any way to manipulate the structure of the model. Using the string is a way to work around the problem, right? To write code that adapts the formula you have to the model you have, so that you can say, okay, I'll write a formula that will work on any column that is a currency, for example, right? You can do that. Technically, in many languages, you can do that. In DAX, you cannot. And that kind of approach would be easier to manage for both the security and the performance, but of course, it requires time, it requires investment that they are not doing. So
fair.
We don't have this.
I had one other one from Kevin, and I'm queuing up to see if anybody else had some questions for you. But Kevin had an interesting one. He really liked the whiteboard that you did in drawing. So is there any blog or like page that will ever be available that kind of shows the back end of that architecture that you have for Dax.do?
I recorded an unplugged video, if I remember well, where I described this. Let me check if I see it, because I don't remember, to be honest. Yes, this one. So on YouTube, you can find this Dax.do behind the scenes is unplugged number 9 on SQL BI channel, recorded on March 6, 2021, and it's a more detailed description of what I shown you in the whiteboard today. Yeah, I also included some more details about the version of the things that we did. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit more structured, even though it's similar to what we have seen today. Maybe just in 23 minutes, probably I said something more. Yeah.
That's awesome, and I dropped the link in the chat window as well for everybody.
Great. Same.
There we go. Yeah, I've been loving all the videos that you guys have been doing. I think I saw somebody on Twitter or somewhere else recently that's just like, of all the tech communities, and I mean, I don't closely follow, say, YouTube channels for Tableau or anything else, but apparently from somebody who at least tracks a few of them, it seems like Power BI has a very healthy amount of YouTube channels available out there to consume, which is nice, and like very high quality ones too. Like it, you know, I very often, like on LinkedIn, probably once a week or so, I'll see somebody doing like a top 10 list of their favorite YouTube channels related to the Power BI, and then there'll still be an additional 10 or 20 other channels that people will list below of like, why didn't these people get included? There's so many of them. It's really cool.
You're right. I think that the many people don't realize that the Power BI audience is huge. Think about this. A number is just a number, right? So I like this similarity. When you start thinking about, so if someone tells you $1,000, $100, $10,000, you immediately figure out, okay, $100 is, you imagine something you can buy with $100, with 10,000, with 1,000. Now, when we approach 100,000, 1 million and 10 million, you no longer have the same clear perception of the difference. Can you imagine what I'm saying? So if you think about the difference between having $1,000 and $100, you probably immediately recognize from a practical point of view what it means in the real life. But when I say this is $10 million, this is $100 million, you cannot imagine what does it mean, right? Because
Fair.
it could mean, okay, I can buy a yacht, I can buy a super yacht. You don't understand, you don't realize the difference between two boats. One is 10 million and one 100 million, because we're not used to that, right? We're not in that, we don't play that game. But one game we play well is time. 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, 10 years, 100 years. Now, see, if you think about this term, think about this. Power BI has 200,000, more or less, companies that use Power BI. If this is a number that Microsoft provided in one of the last conferences. I remember 200, it could be between 200,000 and 300,000, right? Okay. Now, 200,000, okay, 2 months. Okay, 2 months. You can imagine what you can do in 2 months, right? Now, the number of users of Power BI is, I think, around a few million users. It should be between 5 and 10 million, if I remember well. Now, if you do the math, because if you think 100,000, 2 million, you say, well, yeah, it's more, but no. Now think about this: 2 months, 100 months. 100 months is 8 years. Okay, 2 months, 8 years. Now you see the difference. Now, think about Tableau. Everybody knows Tableau, right? Tableau has, I think the last time I seen, less than 100,000 of customers. Way less. Yeah. And the number of users of Tableau, I don't know if it reaches 1 million. Now, think about 1 year, 8 years. Now you see the difference, right? 1 year, 8 years. Oh, come on. In 8 years, you can do many things. In 1 year, 8 holidays, 1 holiday. You can do the math. Think about something you realize. Now, Excel is above 300 million users, which means that it's 30 times the number of users you have today in Power BI. So you can, if you think that Power BI is 8 years, Excel is 1 century. So you can imagine that, wow, wait a minute. So this is the reason. Even though we don't have the audience of Excel, and if you look at the YouTube videos about Excel, there are many more than Power BI for 2 reasons. First, it has been for a longer time. Second, it has a much wider audience. But if you think at scale, if you think at the scale that I'm describing, Power BI is not so small, because it starts to be a large audience. There are many people using Power BI all around the world. And for example, there are, in Brazil, the number, if you look at the numbers of the VideoTube channels in Brazil, you might be surprised. But when you look at the numbers of the users in Brazil, you're no longer surprised. It's just a reflection of the market. The market share that they have in Brazil is huge. There are a lot of users in Brazil, and this is reflected by we see that because with OKBits, we have a component that is, we see the consumption, and these are users, not just developers. Because when you look at the traffic on SQL BI, you just monitor how many developers are in each country. But when you look at the consumption of the report for OKBits components, you look at the number of end users consuming the report. And when you look at those numbers in Brazil, it's amazing. It's amazing.
I get a lot of at least the telemetry that I have both for website visits and also just from YouTube views. There's a lot of Central and South America consumption that comes in for that stuff. I think it's probably like second to English. I would, from what I've seen, and obviously it's hard to track anything Chinese because YouTube is not supported in China. But I would say Spanish language videos are certainly the second most prolific on YouTube for that. I do have one other question, I think related a bit more to DAX, and I think we can wrap up for the day. But this is a good one about Powerfx that somebody brought in. So let me put this up. Here we go. Send. So at some point, will Powerfx and DAX have the same connection, or are they incompatible architectures? So I guess, is there going to be some kind of connection's a little out of a phrase, but like, will there be any kind of a fusion between the two of them?
So I have to be, full disclosure, I don't know Powerfx so much. So
I've dabbled in it, but yeah.
But sorry?
I've dabbled. I've explored it a bit, but like you, I'm not. No. I haven't. Yeah.
Of course, I have seen it. I quickly took a look at it, and I have seen how it works, and I know many other languages. And the problem is the following: DAX is a very, very specific, special purpose language. DAX only does one thing. It does only queries. It does not create data. It does not manipulate data. It just query data. It doesn't have any UI. It doesn't have any. It is very specific, very, very domain-specific language. We call this way, right? DSL, domain-specific languages, like MDX, like SQL. The standard ANSI SQL actually is broader because it is not only about the query, it's also about the data manipulation language, like update, insert, delete, and about the data definition language, create table, delete table, and so on. DAX doesn't have any data manipulation statement, doesn't have any data definition statement. So if you think about SQL is a much bigger language than DAX. Even though DAX has many more functions than SQL, and this is a complex thing why it is, but yeah, this is the way it works. So it's a very, very specific language, and I don't see how the two could be combined together, because actually Powerfx is a general purpose language mainly created for creating UI, even though it is not limited to the UI, but it's not a specific language. So I don't see how the two could be mixed together. I simply don't see the connection. Now, if the question is another, can we customize a Power BI report using Powerfx? That's another conversation. So if you would like to have a more powerful language rather than DAX to create your reports, but that's a different problem, because DAX is a language that just describes a calculation. That's it, no more than that. And it has a so specific language, it cannot be replaced by another language. At the same time, it wouldn't make sense to extend DAX with some user interface statement, because DAX runs in the engine and it is not related to the user interface. So if you want to provide in Power BI a language to create a more interactive UI, you're welcome. I don't know if Microsoft wants to do that, but it is certainly possible. But it will be always a different thing. You want to customize the UI with a language that is different from the language you use to describe the query. These are two different things.
I think that's a very fair answer. And like you said, it's the types of languages and the requirements and the needs that they service are some overlap, but also very different in a lot of ways, especially with any ability to define, read, or to write in that regard. Somebody did mention the add column, but that's something that really just, it creates something on within the query in a temporary table to return a result, rather than actually writing any permanent number anywhere. There was one other question that would probably take quite a bit of time to answer, so I'll just say that Marco's details are down if you want to ping him, either on LinkedIn or anywhere else in the description. But otherwise, I think this would probably be a good time to wrap up. We're at about 10:15. Yep. Marco, is there anything else you wanted to say before we kind of wrap up today?
No. I don't know. I'm happy to have this conversation. It's always fun to. Now I'm curious to see what happened in the meantime on the other launch event, and I will just look at the recap.
Exactly.
I know that there will be a lot of commercial I can skip this way. I can just look at the technical side. So
exactly. I'm going to wait for the too long didn't read blog article. That's just like here's the thing you should care about. I'm sure I'll get to that later today.
Yeah. Me
But
too, me too, me too.
I very much appreciate whenever you're on. It's always great, and like you said, like I think if you wanted to, we could easily just talk for hours about this stuff. But thanks for coming on. I'm sure I'll have you on again at some point. I'm very appreciative of the level of energy and effort that you have to just like connect with the community. I think it's really great.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ed. I
All
just
right.
look at your experimentation, your experiments with the UI and new stuff. I also watch your videos, so
Appreciate that. Thank
good
you.
work. Good
All
job.
right. Until next time.
Okay.
Ciao.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships as well. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on social media to help pass on this awesome content and to help the channel grow. So until next time.